The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. My name is Dave and I'm here with my lovely co-host, Greg. He is so lovely.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Makes sense that you're in a good mood again, Dave, because you've taken me on a journey. You've given me an assignment.
Yeah.
And
quite the assignment.
It was quite the assignment, and I don't know how I feel. It's like something that you have to do, I guess. That's how I was explaining it to myself. I was like, this is, in a sense, high art, and it's one of those things that everyone should experience. And what we're talking about here is the Universal Monsters.
Greg, I'm going to be dead honest with you. The assignment I gave you, there is no way in my mind that I thought you were actually going to do it.
Look, Dave, I take this seriously. And what we've come to realize as, I think that your master plan behind this episode is that these universal monsters have universal issues.
Yes.
Wow. Isn't that what we're talking about here?
Nice. You got it in there. Very well done.
Yeah, I was very proud of that line, and I knew I'd have to shoehorn it into this episode at some point.
So every now and then you get an idea in your head, right? And then you think it's unique. And then you find out, well, hey, other people also have a similar idea. And I had that happen with this specific topic. So a few years ago, I started to think about some kind of framework for using the universal monsters as representations of mental health issues. And I was like, oh, this is onto something. And it started with looking at Frankenstein, looking at Dracula. And then I kind of went through the list. I was like, they all kind of represent something. And I'm really going to put that to the test today because, as you mentioned, I gave you the assignment to dig into these, and you decided to watch each of the films of these main Universal monsters, not all the Universal monster movies, because there is way too many for that. But you watched the, 5 main ones?
Yeah.
5?
And you know what I'm going to call them? I'm going to call them the first and the worst. Because they were like the first of their kind. So I don't even know if this was actually the first Dracula movie. I don't know if that Nosferatu counts.
It 100% counts.
Okay, so is this the first one?
No, the Nosferatu one was definitely prior to this.
Okay, well, Dracula.
The Nosferatu one was so old that it's a silent film. Have you seen Nosferatu?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a silent film.
And do you recommend it?
Not to you.
Okay.
It's one of those ones where it looks so choppy and there's words come up and they it's so old that it actually just the fact that it's old makes it look creepy.
That makes sense.
But the Nosferatu itself is super cool looking. It's an experience. You should check it out. But
that's what I'm gonna say. These are an experience, and I almost think that everyone should just kind of grab a look at it. It's boy, times have changed as far as movie making, though.
Yeah, but you got to understand, that's what makes this so cool. These are films from the 30s,
right?
And they have, these monsters and all these themes, and I think that that's so cool that even in the 30s, people were into this stuff, and this was genuinely terrifying.
I know, that's what I thought was so interesting. Even during Frankenstein, the precursor, they did this trigger warning where it was listen, you guys better be ready for this. This is going to be crazy. And then
strap on your seatbelts, folks.
Yeah. And then it just wasn't.
No.
You know what I mean? It just wasn't crazy.
No.
So, right. Dave, this is fun, but where do you want to start?
Yeah. So let me just give a quick little recap of what this, when we say Universal Monsters, what does that even mean? All right. So Universal Studios, Universal Films, has done a number of monster movies. We typically think of a handful of them when we're thinking of who the Universal monsters are. So we have Dracula, we have Frankenstein, we have the Mummy, we have the Wolfman, the Invisible Man, the Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I think that's the main ones that we typically go with. Or at least that's the ones we're going to cover today, because I think those are kind of the notable characters. Even till recently, I didn't even really consider the Invisible Man to be in that grouping, but he definitely is. And anytime you see a box set or something like that, you'll often see the Invisible Man in there. But these aren't actually the first Universal monster movies. Greg, do you know what one of the first? I think it's the first. Just please don't quote me on this. Like I think it's the first Universal monster movie. Do you know what it is?
No, I have no idea.
We mentioned it last week. Or 2
Wolfman?
weeks ago. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Really?
Yep. The 1913 film was the first Universal monster movie, I believe.
Wow.
Followed by Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Okay.
Which is starring Lon Chaney in 1923. That name probably means nothing to you, but I will explain.
Actually, does it? He is connected to the Wolfman, right?
So that is Lon Chaney Jr. is the Wolfman, and he also is in a ton of these Universal monster movies.
Yeah, I was seeing names like Boris Karloff. And,
they're repeated over and over. Boris Karloff,
Bela
Lugosi. They're in like so many of these, which is so cool that they just use the same characters.
Yeah.
And Phantom of the Opera 1925, also starring Lon Chaney. So those are some of the original ones. But to get to what we were going to talk about for today, like we said, we're going to just go with like the main ones and not the sequels. And there's also a bunch of like offshoot ones, like there's Bride of Frankenstein, a few others that we're just kind of not going to focus on today. Although Bride is very cool, but you didn't watch Bride, so we can't talk about it. All right. So the first one we're going to talk about, I should say, is Dracula.
Yes. Which
is a 1931 film by Todd Browning, starring the one and only Bela Lugosi. It has spawned the sequels Dracula's Daughter in 1936, Son of Dracula in 1943, and House of Dracula in 1945.
So it just moves so quick through the movie, though. That's like something that's interesting to me because I love Dracula personally. I think that Blair Witch and all these found footage movies owe a debt of gratitude to Dracula because it's kind of like the first found footage. If the book's just a series of picked up journals and letters and all that, so it's like kind of interesting that way. But in the book, you have so much more exposition, so much more detail, and you almost have had to have read it to understand the story. I think. Does that make sense?
To understand this film,
yeah,
you would have had to read the book.
I think so.
You don't think it could have stood alone?
I think it was enjoyable without it, but it's like you don't even know why that guy was going to visit Dracula. He's just going to visit Dracula. You don't have any of understanding like why Dracula is dangerous. But maybe that's cool. You kind of have to like discern that on your own. And then like even if like 1992 Keanu Reeves one, he was in the castle for a long time and a lot of things happened. In this one, he was in the castle. Then next thing you know, Dracula's on a ship.
Yeah,
it's pretty quick.
What do you think of Bela Lugosi as Dracula?
I think he's Hungarian and stunningly handsome, as most of us are. Beautiful eye gaze. I like him, and in the 80s, I was Dracula back to back 3 times, and that widow's peak sort of pushed back hair that was where it was at. So yeah, this is when I think of Dracula, it's kind of what I think of, and also the score is very familiar, and I don't know why. Like the music in it, it's familiar.
It's probably been reused. Or you know what? Like as a kid, I don't know if you had this experience, but like I used to watch a lot of things that had clips of movies. So you had this thing, Vincent Price's Creepy Classics, that I would watch on repeat. I had the VHS, and it had clips from all classic horror films, a bunch of stuff with Vincent Price in it, but also like some of the Universal monster stuff. So I'd always seen like
Scissorhands.
No, I don't even think that was made yet when I was watching this. But yeah, it would have like clips from different things. And one of my favorite quotes is when he goes, "Listen to them, children of the night." It's just
kind of great.
It's so great.
It's interesting that you bring up his eyes, because if we're going to start getting to the psychological bend of things, here's the first element, and it's hypnosis, right? He's kind of able to kind of grab your attention with his eyes, which is interesting to me.
So I know, Greg, like you were tasked with watching the films and coming up with your kind of ideas of how these characters connect to psychology or mental health themes. So let me start off by just asking you, what did you come up with for this?
So it's interesting because obviously I almost think it's obvious that I'm supposed to be baited to coming into like some kind of like narcissistic, personality disorder or something like that. Right. But I was thinking to myself, with Dracula specifically. I think he's different than the rest of them. The rest of them are sort of like fall kind of neatly into diagnosis, but this one, it's like a narcissistic person or a personality disorder is based on the assumption that he is, he's putting people down to elevate himself, or like he has this intense sense of, like he's, better than most of us, right? But what if he's this supernatural being, and like he kind of is better than us, right? In a sense. So it's like he's got this bloated ego, but it's kind of appropriate in a sense.
Sure. So one of the things I'll kind of like have you think about, though, is think about how he puts people down. He puts people down by literally sucking their blood and to revitalize himself, right?
Very interesting.
So in a way, it is like he is better than people because he's sucking their blood, which could be like a variation of like putting people down, making people below him, or making like, so the whole premise of becoming a vampire, why is it alluring to become a vampire?
Immortality.
You live forever, you don't age, you stay beautiful, as long as you do what? You have to use others.
Yeah, you have to use others. And it's interesting that you say that. Is the other side of Dracula that I'm thinking about right now is, if you live long enough, like, do you just become evil? Is that like you just become jaded? Like, or do you become supremely good or supremely bad? Like, if thinking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if you take someone and they live long enough, do they become, especially if you're not susceptible, and we'll see this with other things, you're not susceptible, like in Dorian Gray, to the actions that you're taking, you're hurting other people, but that's not damaging yourself at all. So over time, you just kind of lose this respect for human life and you become evil. And I think if you live long enough and you can't die, there is this weird connection with evil, turning evil.
So in my kind of thought process around this, take away like that, with that theme that you're describing, instead of becoming evil, you become alone in real life. So when we use people, when we strive for like vanity and to like boost our ego, and we just keep people below us, we have superficial relationships. I think of like Dracula's ladies, like they're superficial though. It's surface level relationships. Nobody's close with him. He's alone in his castle, alone. But he's like, he thinks he's, he's like a version of God, right? Like, he's created his own version of God as himself. So, but he's all alone too. So he has no one to enjoy it with. And like, think about how narcissistic people kind of exist in this world. Like they create this bubble of this self view that they have for themselves, and they push people away because of that, or people stand kind of like standoffish away from them, and they end up alone. They feel alone.
You do end up alone, don't you?
So that vanity, ego, narcissism, I feel like that is this version of vampires. Like,
right.
Obviously we've seen other versions, and I don't want to like dissect other sources too much, because this is more about like the Universal Monsters theme. But like, he ultimately is alone. So it's like everything that he's, he can have all the immortality he wants. He can have all like the good looks, all the powers, but he lives alone.
It's almost like, people who have to behave this way to amass wealth, and they have to step on so many people on the way up. And then when they get there, they're not happy because they're alone.
Yeah. And even think about how he has to get women. He has to seduce them with his like hypnotic eyes.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not even like that he has these qualities that just naturally allow people to attract to him. He has these superpowers that force people to be attracted to him by tricking them.
Deceit.
And if you think about narcissism and like grandiosity, like a grandiose self view, it's like self deceit, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's not the real version of ourselves. It's this inflated idea of who we are that we try to utilize to suck people in.
Because Dracula's actually really sad.
Yeah. He's a sad narcissist.
He is a sad guy.
Sad boy.
All right. Well, I think I mean, wow, good job with that one, Dave. What do you want to handle next?
All right. Well, no. Let me just ask you a question. Did you like Dracula?
I didn't want to have to sell you this to the end.
All right. Well, you want to do it at the end? All right. I'll hold off. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't want no spoilers. No spoilers. Okay. So the next one, and this is an easy one because we've kind of already covered this in a way. But the next one would be Frankenstein, also 1931. This is directed by James Whale and stars the one and only Boris Karloff.
Yes.
So some sequels that are spawned by this film are Bride of Frankenstein, obviously, that was in 1935. Son of Frankenstein in 1939. Ghost of Frankenstein in 1942. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman in 1943. House of Frankenstein in 1944. And Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein in 1948. Greg, I can proudly say I saw all those except for the Abbott and Costello one.
Oh, you missed the best one, probably. And
Probably.
I think that the list goes on, right? Because the Frankenstein's reincarnations go all the way to modern.
Of course. Yeah. So these are just like the Universal Monster World.
Oh, those are all Universal,
movies.
huh?
Yes, these are all ones within the Universal Monster World.
And you're right. You're right. Like we did cover this before, but I think that just looking at it through the lens of mental health, trying to get like, philosophical like we did last time, which was a lot of fun with this. But for me, what I took away from this one is now this is where I was seeing like narcissism, so like Frankenstein literally said, and it's Henry Frankenstein, which was throwing me off. I always thought it was Victor Frankenstein. In the book, it's Victor, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So he literally says like 4 times that he's created man in his own image. Now, if that's not a grandiose statement, I mean, because it's.
Oh yeah. So looking at the creator.
So that's what I'm going to. So
Dr.
yeah,
Frankenstein himself. Yeah.
Dr. Frankenstein himself has these grandiose delusions. Like he's got this really supreme personal superiority. His father is a baron, super overconfident. He's definitely willing to exploit others for self-gain. If you just look at his buddy Fritz, who I always thought was Igor, but apparently his name's Fritz in this. But if challenged, he becomes hostile and aggressive. So this is like really typical narcissistic.
I think he becomes Igor in one of the sequels, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
Igor comes at some point, and I'm trying to remember which some listeners gonna like.
I might have looked it up. I think it was Bride of Frankenstein.
I want to say it was Bride of Frankenstein or Son of Frankenstein, but yeah, there's definitely an Igor at some point.
So
he's such a jerk, huh?
He's so mean.
He pokes and prods at the monster, but it's like. It's so funny because what's happening, and this is so cool that they captured this, it's that whole hierarchy effect where Dr. Frank, like,
absolutely,
quote unquote, typical people are up here. And like Fritz is kind of like this, like, misfit type, like that clearly, would kind of be like an outlier in society.
Renfield.
Yeah, he's totally a Renfield. And then he sees the monster. And he feels like he's above him, so he starts to poke at him.
It's such a human concept to kind of divide and conquer, like elevate one person over another. And now they're not worried about taking out Dr. Frankenstein. Now they're just dealing with each other. So to me, like throughout this whole thing of just the doctor himself, he's got these grandiose delusions. Obviously, he thinks he's godlike. He believes he's got this huge position in society. He thinks he's so intelligent, which I guess he kind of is, but what's he really doing here besides just mishmash sewing together a bunch of body parts?
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem very professional, does it?
No. And you know what's funny? Like they clearly liked this type of character. So again, we're looking at like a Dr. Jekyll.
Yes.
And also we'll get to this later, but we're looking at an Invisible Man type character.
Absolutely.
So they really loved like this idea. Like Universal Monsters clearly, when they were creating these films, they were clearly worried about where science was going to take us. Like that was obviously a reflection of the time. And then the time there must have been like a significant fear of what science will bring.
Like we're good where we're at. It almost feels like that way right now with like AI. It's like, we're good where we're at.
Yeah.
Like have to keep pushing. So we're going to see more of that in pop culture too. Antisocial behavior from Dr. Frankenstein, obviously grave robbing and sewing together pieces of a human body is like not sort of normal.
I just thought he was excited. He had an idea.
Well, would you say excited or would you say completely manic? The part when The part when he brings his friends to see what he's done, then he's like very hostile with them, but then when he's showing them what he has on the table, he's completely manic. He's like telling everyone to sit down, be quiet, don't talk to me, like I'm working here.
What's the brain labeled that they end up using?
Is it abnormal, or am I thinking of the other?
Or is that Young Frankenstein where it's
That
like
might be-
abnormal or something?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
even in this one, there's like I didn't watch it this year. I watched it last year, so it's a little foggy to me. But I know that there's
it might have said like criminal brain.
I think that's what it said. I think it said criminal brain. Yes, it was criminal brain. I love that, criminal brain.
Yeah. And the Fritz grabs it, like, because that's the scene where, they're Fritz is spying because he needs a brain to finish the job. Yeah. And there's a great fantastic brain that's just perfect. And then there's this criminal brain right next to it. And of course he grabs.
And why would you send Fritz to do that?
I know. Grab of all people. I mean, send Fritz to grab the feet and you go grab the brain.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, exactly. Have Fritz do all your heavy lifting, not grabbing the most important thing in this experiment.
So what do you think about the doctor?
I agree with everything you just said. I actually hadn't really put too much thought into analyzing the doctor, but everything you said sounds accurate. There's this part of him that when it happens, when he creates the monster, obviously there's immediate regret.
Yes.
Right? And like shock and disgust, but he doesn't stop there. So he doesn't learn from his mistakes. So, and then, we'll see that obviously in Bride of Frankenstein as well. So not a great character.
Not a great character, but so, I mean, I guess this leads us into the monster itself. Is that what we call it? The monster?
Frankenstein's monster. But obviously everybody kind of knows him as Frankenstein these days.
Which is strange. So he's got that damaged prefrontal area, and that's obviously going to create some aggression. But I mean, do you want to take what your thoughts with here? And then I can
like I said, my thoughts are going to be rather redundant to our last conversation. Like, to me, he definitely represents that idea of abandonment and the issues that come out with abandonment. And I think that you probably made notes of this regarding the reactive attachment, and I think that's the exact conversation we had.
Yeah. Did we talk about reactive attachment?
I'm almost positive we did.
That's so funny because like I wrote that down and I was like, Dave's never gonna believe this. I thought this was like a novel idea, like, because it's so true. It makes you think of Beth Thomas, how she was abused and she had no idea the difference between right or wrong. She's like stabbing her little brother and everything like that. So this reactive attachment disorder, or this nature versus nurture sort of abomination, leads him to kill a little girl accidentally, and just because he doesn't know you can't throw little human beings into water.
And that's such a highlight of what happens when we're not taught the important lessons in childhood, right? So that lack of nurture, I don't know how hard to squeeze someone. I mean, he basically treats her like he's Lenny and she's the mouse in Of Mice and Men, right? Like,
absolutely. Does that suggest a little bit of like intellectual deficits as well, because he's really doesn't have it together at all, especially like speech and
they don't do this in this version, but obviously in the novel he becomes more intelligent, right? Yes. But in this version they stick with he's just a monster, right?
Grunting,
which makes it easier, I think, as for a story, for a horror film like this, to just make it like, I think it would have been a really hard sell in 1931 for them to have a monster with redeeming qualities. Like, I guess they made it so you would probably want to see the monster like defeated in the end or whatever. But he is a sympathetic character.
He sort of is. And what is the deal with him being, upon waking, like he has a trauma reaction to fire? Like, what is that about? So I didn't really understand that. Is that something like, is fire sort of represents the civilized world oftentimes in like literature and stuff, because that's when we became more civilized, when we were able to harness fire. And maybe he has this aversion to the civilized world. I don't know. But what is scary is he dies from his worst fear, which is fire. He dies.
Right.
So that's sad.
Yeah. I kind of wondered if it was like he just didn't understand what fire was. It's like, it's bright, it's in my face, it's hot.
That's
but
true.
but it's like instant fear of it before you can even like, right?
Yeah, it was strange. Yeah, and then the only other thing I'll say about this stuff, like the little girl, that was like kind of like harsh. It's kind of dark for
That's a very dark scene
yeah, it's pretty intense.
for a 1931 horror film. That is a dark, dark scene.
Yes, it was. So where do you want to head from here?
1932,
Okay.
The Mummy,
Oh,
starring Boris Karloff.
yes.
I love The Mummy, by the way. I know I'm just going to put that out there. I do love this. I didn't at first it didn't connect with me as much, but I watched it again a little bit later and this became one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, I wonder, what you were thinking as far as so the mummies, if you want to run us through it a little bit.
Yeah, so let me do that, please. Well, first I'll just say there's like I mentioned all the sequels in the previous ones. This one's no different. The Mummy's Hand in 1940, The Mummy's Tomb in 1942, The Mummy's Ghost in 1944, The Mummy's Curse in 1944 as well. Those all had Lon Chaney Jr., not Boris Karloff, in them, and they actually had like him wrapped in like the bandages. Versus this, The Mummy, which people probably assume he's wrapped in bandages, but that's only for like one scene. It's an
It's kind of
iconic
like
scene, but it's
like
only one scene.
it's almost like a Mandela effect in a sense where it's
You
like
think you saw it?
yeah, you think he's gonna be
Well, do you want to know why? On most of like the cover art you'll see for The Mummy, it's that one scene of him wrapped in bandages and he's got like one eye open.
yeah,
I mean, obviously this is audio, so people wouldn't be able to see it, or I'd show the picture right now.
well, you just did do a little one eye thing.
I
which
did. I have the VHS cover right behind me, so I was going to grab it, but that would be pointless. And then the last sequel for the Universal films was Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy in 1955. So
oh wow, they did all these.
they met everybody. They met them all.
So that's interesting. I just want to say one thing about, you know all these movies, but I just recently last Halloween I watched Friday the 13th for the first time and I didn't run into Jason. So it's kind of like the same thing, same weird effect where you think,
wow, wait, spoiler alert.
oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Was that 1987?
1979.
Oh wow, yeah.
No,
Okay.
81, I think. 81 or 83.
So
anyways,
what do you think about do you want me to run through my thoughts?
I have a little rundown of this one that might kind of summarize for people to understand what this is all about. So
Okay.
I am Hotep's mummy. That's the name of the person. So the mummy of this person is brought to life after an ancient life-giving spell is read out loud. When he comes to life, he takes the scroll of Troth and he prowls the streets of Cairo seeking to reincarnate the soul of his ancient lover, a princess. He finds a woman named Helen who resembles this ancient princess, and he attempts to kill her like you do, when you find her. And because she strikes a resemblance to the princess, and he wants to reincarnate her mummy once he kills her, I guess, basically.
So it's almost like this. The first thing, and I know it's not where we're headed with this, but it's worth a mention, like a paraphilic disorder, like necrophilia. Like you're trying to kill someone so that you can fall in love with them again. And like, you know what I mean? I know there's gonna be like spells involved and everything like that, but that's not.
He wants, so it's like, what would you call two reincarnated people?
I don't know, man. That's interesting, but that's not where I landed as far as like a mental health disorder. And this one, I don't know. Maybe you were in the same spot as me, but I think it's PTSD. And I'll tell you why. Because when we think of trauma or PTSD, we think of stuck points, being stuck in a certain spot, right? So he's killed trying to resurrect his dead lover.
Yeah, and
so that's where he's at. And even when he's resurrected, that's the point where he's stuck at. He's stuck in that. He can't see the future. He wants the past. He can't see that, like, maybe someday I'll find someone who isn't her or doesn't look like her. So this traumatic thing that happened to him is where he's stuck at. And that's his trauma.
Okay.
What do you think?
That's pretty good. It's pretty good. So the one that, and I think I had already kind of thrown out this idea to you, obsession, lust, and also idolization. So, it's this idea that like he's so stuck in his head that I am going to find my princess. I'm going to reincarnate her, that like nothing's going to get in his way. Nothing's going to prevent him from doing it. He's actually going to kill. So I guess some stalking behavior almost.
Yeah.
But like he's obsessed with the idea of this woman, and it's actually to the point where his obsession is no longer even like authentic or genuine, because he's like willing to take it to the point where he's killed this woman who is not her, just based on like she resembles her. He's like, good enough.
So you're basically saying like to serve his own purpose, he will take out somebody else, which is again basically being like, if we really wanted to, we could shoehorn pretty easily every single one of these monsters so far into like a narcissistic.
Yeah, he definitely had some sense of that. I just didn't want to use it again because we did on Dracula.
Yeah, I know. What about grief? What about grief?
So grief, yes, actually, that could 100% fit into this.
Yeah, good grief.
So the thing with like the obsession piece is like, it's again, and you know, this is your thing, like with the self-deceit. He's like telling himself that like for him, like I said, it's like he finds this woman who just resembles her, and he's like, that's fine. It's like the idolization. It's like it's not even about the princess anymore. It's just about his drive to do this, and it like doesn't even matter about who the princess is.
And there was a category of stalkers, you're right to think about that, where it was like that, where it's like, all right, well, she may not want me now, but once I set this whole thing up and you know, kill her and resurrect her and make her a princess, she's gonna love it.
Right.
So it's like, I think it's like erotomanic or something.
Yeah,
but it's very strange.
Yeah, there's a ton of things going on with this one. But yeah, I just really felt like his obsession was to the point where it was like it no longer mattered. It wasn't about the princess, it was about his drive.
Yeah.
So that whole thing became like a, you know, just a side, and the actual obsession was just about his drive to complete this mission that he had in his head.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like the 50 Shades of Grey, or like there's this new movie or a show that someone was talking about. It's called 365, where it's like they're almost these abusive stalking type. Even this show, right, which I accidentally call Joe all the time, but they're this idea that like once, all right, I'm gonna take this woman, I'm gonna stalk this woman, and then after she lives with me for a little while, she's gonna love it. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, it's convincing yourself of something and believing it is a weird thing.
It is, but that's something on some level that is related to every angle of mental health. You know, I think, anyways. All right, well, that's good. What do you think?
I'm feeling good about that one. That one was, I think, a little harder to decipher. It wasn't as straightforward as other ones.
Interesting word, decipher, when we're talking about hieroglyphic
scrolls. Yeah,
yeah, spells.
All right, the next one brings us to 1933, and we are going to take a look at The Invisible Man, which is played by Claude Rains, who, if you ever listen to anything about Claude Rains, I heard was like horrendous to work with.
Really? Claude.
He was a very difficult person to work with.
French.
Yeah. So some of the sequels for this: The Invisible Man Returns, which had Vincent Price; The Invisible Woman; Invisible Man's Revenge; and guess what? Abbott and Costello meet the Invisible Man.
Oh my God, for real?
Yeah.
So this is an honorable mention for me, is H.G. Wells, you know, because I was a huge Time Machine fan, and I wanted to be a Island of Dr. Moreau fan, but that movie just didn't work out.
Oh, that's an infamous movie right there.
That's an infamous one.
Yes. Oh no, I was thinking of the later one, not the one that you're probably right.
No, I'm thinking of the later one, Marlon Brando.
Yeah, there is a previous one.
That one's probably pretty good. Yeah, and then War of the Worlds, of course, as far as like H.G. Wells goes, but important writer, should be mentioned.
So, and this is obviously like taken from his work. So this is actually like, whereas we said with Dracula, that's less about Bram Stoker. This is taken from H.G. Wells's work. Like that is, I believe he actually had like some not necessarily involvement, but like was able to kind of see the film and whatever. I don't know. Anyways, so The Invisible Man, just a quick overview. Dr. Jack Griffin is secluded in a room. It opens up to him at the Lion's Head Inn, where he's confronted by a policeman and some local villagers due to the inn complaining and wanting him evicted because he created a mess in his room and was behind on some rent. What they discovered was Griffin covered in bandages and had some crazy ass goggles on. And he starts to challenge them a little bit and then takes them off to reveal that he is invisible and drives them off and flees to the countryside.
Yeah.
We find out that Griffin is a chemist who discovered the secret to invisibility while conducting a bunch of tests involving an obscure drug called monocaine. And he also has a love interest sort of in the film. There's a woman who's the daughter of his boss that loves him and is stricken with grief when he's missing. So that kind of spawned them to look for him. And then it goes on from there. He's kind of a vengeful guy. He
is
basically wants to control people.
Yeah. You know, it's
And
funny.
yeah.
There it is again, right? It reminds me of that. There's that Frankel quote, like responsibility is as important as freedom.
Yeah.
I think that's what's important here is like, so once he's invisible, this is the way I read it anyway, he's able to get away with things like destroying the room. Like, why did he do that? Like, why is he making a mess? You know? And, you know, he's invisible. So really, on some level, either subconsciously or consciously, he's not responsible for his actions. And think about what would happen to like a child over time if they were able to get away with anything and, you know, they were never responsible for their actions. They had no consequences. Eventually they become a monster, right? Like a Dorian Gray or something else.
One thing that stuck out to me was the scene where he's in his room and he's expecting people to return to the room. And he starts taking off all his clothes and he goes, I'll really give them, he said something like, I'll give them a show. And as he's like stripping naked, but like, obviously he's
kind of funny.
So it's funny to think about that because we understand that he's actually naked at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was an interesting film. Just like if you think about this was 1933 and some of the effects that they were able to pull off. I mean, obviously to today's standard, they're not great, but still in 1933, that was kind of impressive to think about, like making a person invisible. He's taking off like his fake nose and his bandages, and there's nothing. There's just a shirt floating around in some scenes. It's interesting.
There's more depth to this one than I think the other ones, which I mean, obviously the other monsters are much more recognizable, much more beloved, but there's in this movie itself, there's like, I think there's just a lot more going on and it's kind of a little bit more interesting. Yeah. I also think like being unseen is a theme here. If we're kind of reaching for themes,
sure.
Like, that's what anger is, right? Being misunderstood or not being seen. So
definitely misunderstood.
Yeah.
Definitely misunderstood. Yeah, you're right. Yep. He's not being seen. That's a great point right there.
Yeah. And the point that you made earlier is there's a quote when he says, I meddled in things man must leave alone. So what's he talking about there? Like he's a scientist, he took it too far, and now look what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what we see is he can't return.
Yeah.
He can't come back. This woman loves him and he can't even like reciprocate that love because he's so far gone.
You know what's it reminds me of? I don't know if you've ever seen this. I'm sure you have. But remember that Goosebumps episode where like the girl put on the mask and then like she could take it off at first, but it got harder and harder. Yeah, and then she wasn't able to take it off at all. Like that's a scary concept. Like he did this thing and now he's not able to undo it. And he's just stuck that way.
The experiment became who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I had. First off, this is a stretch. I'm going to admit this is a stretch. Borderline.
Okay, I want to hear it.
In the relationships and like the way he creates chaos, pushes people away. Like this woman's in love with him, but he's like, you know, he's not able to like sustain that relationship. It just, like I said, it's a stretch. It just kind of came up to me when I was thinking about the film. Just very like mood libel. Like he's 1 minute he's kind of okay with even the people he doesn't like, or he's kind of tormenting. Like there's a guy that he like basically coerces into working with him and being his body pretty much while he's invisible. 1 minute he sounds like he's almost okay with him, and the next minute he's like controlling and I don't know, demanding, and he's just very vengeful in moments. It's just the instability with his relationships felt very very pertinent.
Yeah, and the weird thing at the end, just kind of being destructive like that.
That's,
yeah.
You know, yeah.
No, that's actually not bad.
It's like he's having some sort of breakdown or episode. The other thing, addiction.
I was gonna say addiction too, because
Yeah.
it's the same kind of like message as science, where it's like, don't mess with this stuff because it'll change you forever.
Yeah. I mean, he's literally using a drug
Yeah.
to create this invincibility and invisibility. And I mean, the invisibility gives him like this false sense of like being untouchable,
Mhm.
being invincible. And like that, when people do drugs, sometimes that's the feeling they get. And when
Absolutely.
that wears away, we're vulnerable again, right? So when
And
he's able to
you
be
are different. You've literally changed you've changed your reward system, but you've changed your body chemistry in a sense.
Yeah.
So there's that angle there. That, I mean, we are
and you lose relationships to people who love you. And I think that, like, I do think, even though that it almost feels somewhat like an afterthought, like the woman who loved him, I know it's not an afterthought because it's present in the film, but like that's what happens. Like people who love you lose you, and like, because it's not you anymore. So
uh,
she was like kind of grief stricken by his disappearance, aka he's doing drugs all the time, he's secluded, or he's just not himself anymore.
yeah. Yeah. No, that's actually good. I mean, that's more than people are gonna get from that movie, I think.
I could not stand the shrieking lady. I know everybody. I heard so many of you like reviews of this film where people like thought that was hilarious. That drove me bonkers. I'm not. So here's a little thing about me, and anyone who knows me will know this. I watch the TV on a rather low volume. I'm not super into like loud stuff, and she
Oh.
was very loud. I could not regulate the volume of my TV because of her. Like I had to keep turning it down when she would start shrieking.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I
She's
noticed that too,
the
actually.
worst.
Didn't bother
Yeah.
me as much, but
All right, let's get into. We have two more.
okay.
Hopefully, people are enjoying this and we're not torturing everyone. But we got a couple of goodies for people. I think, at least. The first one is the 1941 The Wolf Man, starring Lon Chaney Jr., which I mentioned earlier, his dad being in some of the earliest ones. So that's kind of cool that they were able to keep a family legacy.
That's actually really awesome.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I totally dropped the ball and I forgot to write the sequels to The Wolfman. There was an Abbott and Costello Meet the Wolfman. That's all you need to know.
That is really all you need to know. Also, a Jack Nicklaus remake of Wolfman, which is with Michelle Pfeiffer, which is actually.
Oh, and there's Benicio del Toro's Wolfman.
Yeah, how did you like that one?
It's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
No, but I'm more of a American Werewolf in London kind of guy.
Yeah. What about the Paris one? Because I kind of like that one.
That was trash.
Okay.
you
No, so I will say this:
London.
There's two things that we could talk about here that's actually kind of fun that is just coming to my mind now. There's two specific transformations of a Wolfman that is stuck in my mind, and one is that one that you're talking about. That was intense, especially for like an early 80s movie, right?
Oh, it's considered to be one of the best transformations ever created on film.
Can I give you the best?
Teen Wolf.
Nope. Although that's up there. The Thriller video, Michael Jackson.
Oh yeah, that's great.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. That's great. But it's all practical makeup, which for people who aren't familiar with what that means, it's like there's no computer generated effects. It's all makeup and just like camera angles to make things look realistic. It's just so great.
It is pretty great.
It's gross, but it's great.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Quick overview of the Wolfman. The character played by Lon Chaney Jr. is called Larry Talbot. And he basically returns to, I think it's his hometown, for a funeral, if I remember correctly. While he's there, he goes to like an antique store. He buys a walking stick, and it's got a head of a wolf on it. The woman warns him that, like, not warns him, but tells him, "Oh, that's a werewolf on there," or something like that. So that's kind of like for warning you what's going to happen. As he's walking home at night, he sees a woman being attacked by what he believes to be a wolf. And he then intervenes. He kills the beast with his new walking stick.
Yeah.
And but in the process, he also is bitten on the chest. He's told by a fortune teller that the wolf.
The honorable mention.
Yeah, so he tells that the wolf, what he thought was a wolf, was actually her son, and who's played by Bela Lugosi, and that he is a wolf man, and that anyone who's bitten by him will also become a wolf man.
So this is some of the cooler lore. This is up there with like Dracula lore. as far
Yeah.
as
Oh,
like
so I couldn't hear what you had said. You had said gypsy, honorable mention. I got.
yeah.
You're right. And you know, it's funny when I think we might have mentioned it in the gypsy episode. Did we not?
I
I
don't
think
know.
that was one of the pop culture references.
Yeah, they are into this kind of stuff, werewolves
Yeah.
for sure,
Yeah.
and vampires and all that. So, what did you?
Well, just to finish that off really quick, one of the last things I wanted to mention about the plot line is so after that, he transforms into a wolf-like creature, stalks the village. He kills a local gravedigger at one point. And after the transformations, he does retain some memories of being a werewolf and wanting to kill. And he struggles with this whole condition that he's going through. So your question was going to be, what did I come up with?
Yeah, I guess as far as like mental health, and I think I probably know.
Yeah. So three themes: anger, mood swings, and bipolar. I think they all kind of represent the anger, especially for me for this, is like represented in that guilt that he experiences outside of it. So it's that idea that when people struggle with anger issues, often one of the biggest things that impacts them is how their angry actions impact their life afterwards. So it's that feeling of like guilt that I just ruined this relationship. I just blew up at my job and now I got fired or I'm on probation or whatever. It's all the things that anger causes that impacts us later that really is like the biggest issues with anger. Obviously, if you're hurting people, that's a huge issue too. But the residual of the anger. And I think that they represent that pretty well with like the way that he, has vague memories of what he, being a werewolf and stuff like that. So kind of like that, for people who have like really angry outbursts or any kind of like emotional dysregulation like that.
That makes sense. For me, it's definitely bipolar. Well, actually, it's two. There could be two things. So I like the bipolar idea just because he can sort of, or at least maybe I'm just like tying in a little bit more like Wolfman lore, but you feel the change coming. Like, that it's going to happen and that you're going to be manic and you can try to take preventative measures, but that might not always work.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting kind of part of it. So, you kind of literally have this bipolar personality where like some of the time you're calm and almost like yourself. And some of the time you are completely out of control. And it's not this. And while you're experiencing that, it's egosyntonic, which, meaning we've talked about that before, where it's like you're enjoying it. It's not like you're like, oh my God, I'm the Wolfman right now. I hate it. No, you're just tearing it up.
Yeah.
And another thing is dissociative identity disorder. It's like something like we talked about with Billy Milligan, something crazy happening in your life. So this like huge external trauma that your personality, who you are right now, couldn't handle. So this new personality takes it over. That's sort of like a theme in there, I think.
Sure. Absolutely.
Fun character, though.
This one is way more straightforward, I think, than
absolutely
most of them, especially the next one.
Oh, yeah. This one I had a very interesting, run us through this one.
Okay. All right. So our final Universal monster, the creature from the Black Lagoon, 1954. He is played by Ben Chapman. Just a couple of sequels: Revenge of the Creature in 1955 and The Creature Walks Among Us in 1956. I highly recommend you watch all three. They are great. And Clint Eastwood, a young Clint Eastwood, plays a scientist in Revenge of the Creature, I want to say. I want to say it's the second one.
That's cool.
It's pretty cool to see a young Clint Eastwood not playing like a cowboy or something.
Stunning, right? Good looking guy.
Yeah, very good looking guy. Very good. Yep. So just quick overview. There is all right. So it starts off with a geology expedition uncovers a fossil that links land and sea animals. So they make a case to do another expedition to look for the remainder of the skeleton. During the expedition, the creature investigates a campsite, but when he is met by the campers, the mere sight of him frightens them, and he responds with rage and kills them. And this kind of like setup happens a few times throughout the film, ultimately to the end where he like kidnaps a lady that he falls in love with, I guess, and she bonks him on the head and then flees.
Wait, so what? What do you? I'd love to know what you're thinking for this one.
All right. So this one kind of had tones, and like I put down a few keywords, and I don't know if these are the words or the like. I don't know if they fit completely with my like thoughts about it, but like these were the only things I could think of as far as words to describe it. Like colonization, gentrification, or like just minority in general, kind of
Okay,
being
yeah.
treated as othered. Um,
We were going down the
how,
same road
how
here.
yeah, how we treat people who are different and the feelings that that causes inside of them. Like he's met the response to seeing him invokes such a response from people that it causes him to feel terrible about himself, and then he immediately responds with rage.
So yeah, I am surprised we kind of ended up in the same direction here because
Oh, okay.
the word I wrote down was xenophobia, and then sort of like profiling. So
There you go.
they
Xenophobia. That's a good one for it.
they attack him based on his appearance alone. I
Yeah.
mean, really, that's what's happening here.
And the gentrification thing, that's kind of like, it feels like outsiders, kind of like wealthier outsiders, kind
Yeah.
of investing, like in invading this land that's kind of like in their minds, like it's like colonization, right? It's
No,
like,
actually, colonization's like imperialism, colonization, like this idea of like where I'm thinking of like explorers and settlers like coming to different ports and all like maybe they're like, oh, we have to show them our religion, we have to show them how to be civilized, we have to show them our ways because somehow we automatically feel like our ways are better than their ways, and no, we're gonna push them down their throat, and once again we're gonna be looking at some narcissistic type behavior
yeah.
every
And
single.
there's always this like idea that, oh, this land's unexplored, but guess what? It's a home to somebody, right?
Yeah.
And it's the home to the creature, and they come into his land and then treat him like he's a beast.
Mm-hmm. Not fair, like King Kong-ish, right?
Yeah.
Kind of.
He also is a sympathetic creature,
He is a sympathetic.
character in my eyes.
So I would say like the only one that's kind of with a question mark on a monster is the Invisible Man. Is he a monster?
I think he's a monster. He is, to me, he had the most villainous personality out of all of them. No, the Mummy as well, actually. I think Boris Karloff's character in that is definitely a villain.
See, I think Dracula is the most villainous.
Do you?
Yeah, well, he's just kind of pure evil, right? He does not care about anybody.
He's so vain. He couldn't care.
Yeah,
he could care less.
that's true. So, hey, listen, or you could watch all these, or you could just watch the '80s classic Monster Squad.
Yeah, or you could just listen to this podcast.
Yeah, that's true too. Skip it all and do that.
No, you should watch all of these. There's a lot of films here. I was actually like, as I was making the list of all the sequels, I was like, wow, I watched so many movies just in this realm.
Now, let me ask you this, because I got to be honest, they're not good. I mean, some of them are just not good. I mean, look, is it so? Is this like sacrilegious or something or blasphemous for me to say I'd rather watch the Keanu Gary Oldman 1990?
Yeah, but you're comparing apples and oranges. You can't.
I know. I guess
a movie made in
I know what you're saying.
1930 to a movie made in 1990.
But so you're watching this and you're saying like, I appreciate this.
I
as opposed
literally enjoyed.
Okay.
No, I enjoyed Creature from the Black Lagoon and the sequels. I literally enjoyed The Mummy, kind of drawn out in some parts, but I overall enjoyed it. Like, I actually like a lot of these movies.
Frankenstein's tough.
You know, the thing with Frankenstein is like, it's because when you tell people to watch it for the first time, there's an idea of Frankenstein versus what the actual film is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what hinders people when they're watching it, because they assume it's going to be something else, maybe a little more action packed.
Yeah.
Or just, I don't know. It's a 1931 film. I don't know what to say.
I know. What do you want? It's just they're tough. I don't know. And it's funny how like people's sensibilities has changed so much. And I wonder what that means about our psyche. But like these things that they're taking these images in with their minds, and they're like, oh my God, this is wild. Like people were freaked out by these movies, and now it's like the things that we can accept into our minds, like the things. So like you're watching Frankenstein, but it's like that's still a guy,
Yeah.
and you know that, right? But the movies you see now, it's like that is nothing that should be real, and I wonder what that's doing to our brains. It can't be good.
A little kid saw Frankenstein and found it so terrifying that maybe he left the theater thinking that Frankenstein was going to come around the corner and would squeeze him.
Yeah.
I went to go see Urban Legends as a kid, and when I got into the car, had to look behind me to make sure that no one was in the back of my car and wasn't going to strangle me to death. Like that's the different experience that we had versus a kid back then. It's like it's just a different. And nowadays, like the stuff that
like Saw and all this stuff, seeing this craziness, and I mean, just the way you can make creatures look. I mean, that's wild. So
it's awesome. It's evolution in some ways, and that's like evolution I can appreciate when we can create these really cool looking things. Yeah, it's great.
Tomato.
I mean, we talk a lot about we talked about a lot of the sequels. There's obviously been a ton of like recreations and reimaginations of all these films. These films, if for nothing else, Greg, if they didn't connect with you, what they've spawned is insane.
Yeah.
The amount of stories and spin-offs and ideas that have just been regurgitated from just these characters we just discussed is crazy.
I know, it's almost like you can trace them all back to these characters, and see, even you don't have to go do much work with Dracula and see like True Blood and Twilight and every incarnation of vampires you can imagine. That's just always going to be a thing. Every year there's a vampire movie.
Yeah,
and and I'm on board for it. So yeah,
do you think Bram Stoker's Dracula would have, like, obviously the novel existed before the film and it was its own entity, but do you think the character of Dracula could have been so popular without the 1931 film of Dracula?
Absolutely not, because even when you're watching the stereotypical vampire looks like that, and when you're watching, like, I remember watching a vampire movie like in the 80s, or when you look for a vampire costume right now, that's what you're getting. Like, you're getting the cape and sort of like the teeth hair pushed back. Like, you're not getting Edward from Twilight. That's just not a vampire.
Yeah, and I think that's been like a newer thing, is to bring that, like, maybe that kind of like Bram Stoker's Dracula into the forefront, like nowadays. But for ages, it's been that like that Dracula character that we know from the film.
Which is making me be like, maybe you're right. Like, maybe I'm, I want the old fashioned. I want the old thing. I don't want all these new vampires. I want the original. I appreciate it.
I'm with you. I love it.
It's good stuff.
Good stuff.
All right. Well, hey, that was awesome.
This went way better than I thought it was going to go. So there's that. This was something, Greg, I kind of shared this with you a while ago, but like I've been trying to put a lot of these thoughts together about these characters for quite a while, but it was nice to have someone to bounce these ideas off and also kind of open my eyes to some different ideas. Because that's the thing, when we get caught up in just our own, when we only have our own perspective, it's hard to know what else there could be. So it's nice to have somebody else to kind of bounce these ideas off of. And I give you so much credit for watching these films in a rather short time. So
it was tough.
Good job, man.
It was an undertaking, but yeah, no, I'm glad I did. I don't regret it. No regrets. Happy to do it. And honestly, I'm glad that this is going to be out there too, because I think a lot of this, unlike a lot of our podcasts, this is a very organic sort of episode. So it was a good topic.
This had me feeling the way I felt when we did the Scream 3 episode.
Yeah.
And it just it feels less pressure.
Effortless.
It's just straight off the dome piece.
Yeah, that's it.
All right. So we're halfway through the month. Got a couple more weeks left of October. couple more topics that will fit into this month, and then we'll be moving on.
Yeah.
It'll be sad.
Oh, but this is it. We're in it right now. We are in it, and it's great.
Yeah, we keep rocking here.
Let's
keep
do it.
rocking. So we'll be back next week. But as we always say, if you like what you hear, or if you have suggestions, or just want to like give some feedback, we love to hear it. Hit us up on social media, but more importantly, let us know what you think in the form of a rating and review, so we know that we're on the right track if you guys are connecting to what you're hearing. So Apple Podcasts is definitely one of the best ways to do that. Their format allows for the rating and review, which others don't. So if you could be so kind, we'd love to hear what you're thinking. And again, if you guys have topics, throw them our way. We definitely love listener suggestions. Where did I get that from?
I don't know. Maybe your app or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So definitely hit us up with those, and we'll definitely put them in our agenda. Thank you, everybody. Have a pleasant evening and spooky dreams.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.
I mean, just for now.
Yeah, just for now.